there's so much hatred now between different, I think generated sometimes artificially between two divisions. But why is it that we don't, as a rule, hate the British?
We don't, as a rule,
hate the British.
Hate the British. Yeah, we're very loyal to the British. But that is, I think, partly that the British haven't come in as a political object of hate, as the Muslim community has. Remember that nationalism, when it gets diverted into directions that are undemocratic, has to find an enemy within and has to gear the majority to attacking that enemy. I mean, whether it was fascism in Germany or fascism in attacking the Jews or fascism in Europe generally attacking the Jews and so on. There has to be that enemy within. And for the Hindu Rashtra, the proponents of people who support the Hindu Rashtra, the enemy within is the Muslim, because the Muslim doesn't, in fact, conform to being a Hindu. And therefore, this will carry on. As long as you have the propagation of a majoritarian democracy, where the majority is defined by religious terms, you will have a Hindu majoritarianism in this country through sheer numbers. And you will have this. The interesting thing again is, I say this maybe as an ancient historian of ancient India, I don't quite follow the arguments of historians of modern India. The interesting thing for me is that all this emphasis on majority, minority, is again a British creation. We had no idea, no concept of there being majorities and minorities in our society till the British started the census. 1872, they start the census, I think it's 1872, well, it's around there. And the whole notion, the term majority, minority comes to be used and becomes politically very powerful. Now, this is really, these are all issues that we should think very seriously about. That how much of our political economy, society, still runs on the interpretation of the colonial period. Do we continue with that, and is this legitimate, or do we question that? This is very important, I think.
So I have one last question for you. Did you ask many questions in school? And did you contradict your teacher?
No, I was generally a good student. I used to ask my questions privately. I was always trailing the teachers I liked, and I would stop them and say, but how can you say that? Because there's this. And they would sit me down and say, well, child, let me explain it to you. And they would explain it, which was very nice. I did occasionally, out of bravado, in class, raise my hand and say, I don't understand. But how can we say that? And then the entire class would look at me and say, brave girl. And I loved that.
But then you've always been brave.
Well, I don't know about that, but I've always asked very awkward questions, I must say, in every situation.
But you have this secret of at least appearing calm when people challenge and they ask ridiculous questions, and you have so many people saying such ridiculous things.
I know, but then if you lose your shirt and start shouting back, it doesn't go anywhere. The only thing, for example, all the abuse that I get, and it's absolutely endless. Since 1970, the internet is just full of it, and now I get emails every day, 3 or 4, really abusive, and the abuse of the patriotic, seemingly patriotic Indian who's attacking me for my historical views can be absolutely the bits. They don't stop at anything. Okay. Now I recognize the names, and so I keep on trashing them. It's very common. But even if I open it and read it, it's a kind of, oh, let's see what they're saying now. It's not really something where one feels, one may get upset for half a minute, but that's about the maximum.
That's because you have the confidence of scholarship.
No, that's because, you know, they do it so much and so often that you can't take them seriously anymore. If it was occasional, and if it was well thought out abuse, and if it was really, you know, attacking you on specific points that you were vulnerable on in scholarship, yes, I would say that that would be much more upsetting. But this barrage of abuse and calling you name after name after name, and attacking you in a very general way, you know, how can you say that the Aryans were not indigenous when the evidence is all to the contrary? But please, give me the evidence to the contrary. That they won't do. But therefore you are the scum of the earth, you're this, you're this, you're this. So you read it and say.
But you are so particular about evidence. I can't give you evidence, but I think many, many more people adore you.
Oh, well, I'll take your word for it.
I already see people trying to catch my attention now. Maybe I should just chuck this. Whoever catches
I want a question. One question.
you next.
First this is the first time I'm actually seeing you, so it's a great experience. There are 2 questions quickly because there are many people who want to ask questions. One is that, about this method of history writing and about periodization. I think a very fundamental point that needs to be made is that the Queen's Proclamation that comes in 1858, which says that all religion is equal, is the point when the naturalization of the majority religion is happening, which is why Christianity becomes invisible. It becomes a set of ethics, and which is, I am taking a Foucauldian point of view, which is why Christianity can't be seen anymore. And therefore one sort of talks about a British period, which is not Mill's doing, but it is the doing of Enlightenment modernity. Therefore we internalize, anything that is European as knowledge, and Hindu and Muslim and Sikh as sectarian. Therefore this periodization also needs to be understood in its causes. What the larger causes that do so. The second thing that I'd like
Yes, can I quickly answer this question?
Yes.
It's not just Christianity that's made invisible. Buddhism and Jainism are also made invisible. And we don't know what the other religions were that were practiced by the Adivasis and by the Avarnas, the Dalits who lived outside. So no attention is paid to that. It is only the religion of the middle class that matters. And
no ma'am. What I mean is, by invisibilizing, I mean normalizing. Not invisible in the sense of making invisible. What I'm saying is it becomes ethics. So, say a Christmas is a festival. Hinduism is also invisibilized as a spring festival. Holi becomes a spring festival in that sense. In that sense. And the second question is, again, quickly, what one also needs to acquire, I guess the historian does acquire it, is the way in which an early modern text is actually made. There are collaborative ways in which the production of an early modern text, say for example the Mahabharata, and I am very interested in your Shakuntala book, is very, very different from the authority and authorship that a modern or even a modern text takes. Now the evidence is also linguistic, the evidence is also generic in the sense of literary genres, and therefore the historian needs to, the historian of early India needs to acquire certain philological and linguistic skills in order to decode those texts.
That is happening. In fact, it's not only linguistic and genetic, it's also the historical context is very important, which I'm sorry people in linguistics often leave out, and I have great rows with them on that, but still. Yes, I think all these contexts are important, and in fact a lot of this is happening with modern history students, researchers. Has happened with modern history researchers, is beginning to happen now with the kind of texts that we use. It's of course very much more difficult with us because we can do the linguistics, we can up to a point do the history, the genetics, but in terms of the environmental context as a totality, it's very difficult for us to reconstruct those connections. But there is a lot of work being done on it, yes. There's hope yet.
Ma'am, my question is on Buddhism and Jainism. Why did Buddhism die out and Jainism sort of continued in India from early times?
That's a huge question.
You can tell us what to read if this is too much.
No, unfortunately there isn't enough written on that. I wish there was much more written. I mean, I've only come across a couple of books recently on when I say books, I mean a well-argued, lengthy argument on why Buddhism declined. I think there are many reasons. One is that it was the major religious tradition, the dharma as it is called in the texts, that questioned Brahmanism. In fact, if you get away from the blocks, the monolithic Hinduism and the monolithic this, that, and the other, and you read the texts, what they say about religion, there's a repeated statement that there are two dharmas, Brahman and Shravan. It's repeated again and again, from the Ashokan inscriptions, Megasthenes, right up to Al-Biruni. He talks about the Brahmins and the Samaniyas, by which he means the Shamans. And Patanjali, around the Christian era, just before, in his grammar, refers to the Brahmins and the Shramans, again as the two dharmas, and says that their relationship is very much like the snake and the mongoose. So that gives us a clue very clearly as to what was going on. And then, of course, if you read the Purans carefully, the Vishnu Puran has a lot on the Shramans, which is again very critical and very abusive even at times. So there's that hostility. Kalhana refers to the Shaiva groups in Kashmir killing Buddhist monks and attacking Buddhist monasteries and so on. One must get away from the fact that the Indian past was a tolerant, non-violent past. That is not the case at all. There is ample evidence of intolerance and violence based on intolerance of religion and ideology and so on. Okay. So that ongoing battle, in that ongoing battle, the Buddhists and the Jains were seen as the major opposition to Brahmanism, and gradually it became more and more the Buddhists. Because I think the Buddhists in the Gupta period, for example, it's very interesting, they're being pushed out gradually from the subcontinent. They're very, very important in Southeast Asia. And they're very important in Central Asia. It's virtually, that is the route by which it goes to China and then from China to Japan. So. And it's curious that people keep talking about the great religions of the subcontinent and cheerfully leave out Buddhism, although it's really at one time the religion of the whole of Asia, except West Asia. So there is that sense of antagonism which would lead the Brahmin. The Gupta period, or just before the Gupta period actually, is a period where Brahmanism is coming back into importance. And the post-Gupta period is a period of a great resurgence of Brahmanism in the form of land grants and so on. They become very powerful. The interesting question is, why did the Brahmins become so powerful at this time? Is it because they are the major people who are legitimizing the new rulers? I mean, every time they want genealogy, it's the Brahmins who provide it. Is it because they are claiming to have supernatural power over eclipses and natural catastrophes? And the argument always is, if we perform this ritual for you, there will be an eclipse, but if we perform this ritual for you, it will not have an evil effect. So they're important, and they're very close to authority and so on. And if you read the secular literature, plays, dramas, and so on, written in Sanskrit in the post-Gupta period, the Brahman is very important as a person who hovers around, playing a secular role. They're the ministers, the chief administrators, people like that. So that's, again, the Buddhists are looked down upon in these plays. So the courtly tradition is turning much more to Brahmanism than Buddhism. And I think another very important factor is that a major patronage of the Buddhists and the Jains comes from merchants and the trading communities. And the post-Gupta period is a period of the decline, a little bit of trade. It picks up again in about the 9th, 10th centuries AD, but that immediate period is a period of decline. So it's possible that the Buddhists and the Jains lost some of their patronage there. Now, these are three very obvious reasons, but one needs to go into them in much greater detail. I think that, for example, the philosophers in this country should be looking at this question in terms of what was happening to the philosophical traditions. And I'm sure there would be many answers in that. Why did Jainism survive? First of all, remember that it survived only in two places, really in any major way, Karnataka and Gujarat. Gujarat, it's very clear, it survives because it is the major, or let's say the religion, the Jain sects in their plurality are the major group of people that are financed by the traders of Gujarat. And in the post-Gupta period, Gujarat has huge trade ramifications by sea. Arabia, the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, going down Sri Lanka, going into Southeast Asia. This is a great period of the expansion of Indian trade into Southeast Asia. So, whereas the Buddhists are expanding overland into Central Asia, the Gujarat traders are expanding into Southeast Asia. And what is very interesting about Southeast Asia is that initially it has a tremendous Buddhist and Jain influence, which gradually declines, and it begins to have a lot of Hindu influence. And then that gradually declines. And then, of course, with the Arab traders coming in the 14th century, it converts to Islam, except in the mainland where Buddhism remains important. So, you know, what one's really getting is not just one religion comes in and destroys the other, and then there's this thing change. There's a kind of muddle of all kinds of religious ideas going on, with people giving all kinds of guarantees to local rulers, with people supporting all kinds of financial groups and so on. It is a very complex history. And I think the religious side of it cannot be seen purely in religious terms. It's got to be seen in the complexities of what is actually happening on a much bigger scale in these areas, outside India as well as within India.
Thank you.
I got the mic? Yeah.
Is this on?
Just check. Yeah. I'll use a cliche term, but desperate times call for...
No, not on.
It's not on, just please.
Light is on.
Yeah. Desperate times call for desperate measures. I'm talking in terms of the current times that we are in. When we have all this bigotry and all this rubbish that is going on in the term of Hindutva, etc., from a very layman's perspective, I get the feeling that it's time that historians move away from their traditional role as being academia, as being academics, and showing us the past, etc. Or even if you're modern, you're showing me the current things, and start a process of engagement. I don't know how legit I'm in asking this, but calling for a process of engagement through whatever platforms, I don't know, that needs to be worked out. But with the masses, if we are talking about people spamming you with all that, ma'am, you're not the only one. I mean, all of us who write or anything which is away from that, what they call the rightist view of things that they see it in. So isn't there a necessity for historians, because you've invested so much into research and you have the know-how, unlike what the politicians do with your know-how interpreted in, isn't it time that you moved away? When I mean you, I mean the whole community as a whole, and get into educating the masses, not just because it often turns out to be preacher teaching the preached. I mean, that's, most of us know, and we get to know more, we learn. But isn't because these times are such, and we have these references where we say, oh, we are going back to Hitler's Nazi rule and the Jebelian philosophy and all that. But isn't it time so that we don't descend into that?
Well, we're always on the edge of descending into that, aren't we? Especially now. No, I agree, but this is very much a personal choice. One can't call upon a whole professional body to do something. Eventually, more than most other professional bodies, academics are doing what they're doing, one hopes, out of personal choice. And so they have a commitment to themselves first. Now, some academics may well feel that they have a commitment to the society that they are living in. And if there are desperate times, then they have to do more than their usual commitment. But I think that on the whole, and I've said this before, Indian academics are a timid bunch of people. We are professionally people who like to just keep to our professional work and say, well, I'm all right, you carry on doing what you're doing, I'll do what I'm doing, and somehow it'll all sort itself out. There is a great sense of somehow it will all sort itself out. Now, I do realize that we're living in times in which somehow it will not sort itself out. And the sooner we realize that, the better. And I don't think that we really fully realize it. There is a small fraction of academics who do realize it, but by and large it's a case of chalta hai. I mean, one notices this in places like, JNU and Hyderabad University and so on, where really dreadful things are going on in terms of the way in which academia is being made to function. What it's being made to teach and how it's being made to teach, how it's being made to recruit students and so on. And quite a large number do protest, but there is a number that just sit there and say, oh, these are all lefties. And they will not join the protests. There are many reasons for this. There are either personal preferences for a certain kind of ideology, or there's a philosophy of unconcern. But there are many reasons for this. Now, I think that one of the important things is not so much that we jump up and say we have to do something. We have to do that anyway, but there are not many people who will do that. But if you make a call, if you say that we as teachers are having problems with the courses that we're being forced to teach, and we demand that the academics who are in these disciplines take a more responsible attitude and guide the curriculum that is to be used in schools. If you make a noise, then you will have more academics who will respond. I think that push has to come. It hasn't come as yet.
Ma'am, for the record, I'm a journalist. I'm not a teacher.
Oh well, all right. Then you're in an even better position to say that there should be such a demand. You know,
You know, this whole enlightening thing that you told us about the cow slaughter ban and the British origins of it, etc. I mean, I know you might be just speaking to people who won't even be receptive to it. But shouldn't there be an outreach to tell them, look, all this cow slaughter ban is bullshit?
Look, what is the outreach these days? It's the media. It's the
It's
social
the corporate
media.
media. I think
I'm
we
sorry,
have to talk
it's the
about
social
corporate
media. We will talk about it. Precisely. That's the problem. If I'm going to be, nasty about my fellow academics and say that we are largely a bunch of people that don't rush out into the battle, you journalists are doing the same thing. In your TVs, in your newspapers, in the social media, you don't object. If there's somebody who's being slaughtered for carrying a cow, you don't raise these issues and say that this is unreal, this is untrue. What are we doing? We're fighting for a myth. You don't do that. And so
then that's generalization, because there are social media, because of the corporate media, I mean, let's not, all I'm just trying to put into perspective, because of the corporate-owned big media houses, social media has become a very powerful tool which is being used beneficially and...
Yes, look, there's a certain ideology that has a battalion of trolls. The other ideology does not have a battalion of trolls. Now, if it's going to be a case of the trolls are abusing rational opinion, then the other ideology has to have its battle of trolls that will abuse those trolls and say no.
That is, yes.
But I'm surprised that in all these years of trolling, that it's only been one ideology that has actually organized trolling.
Yeah, because there's lots of money, they get it done.
Let me move to the next question.
Yeah, that's true.
Ma'am, firstly, thank you very much for this wonderful discussion, and I'm thankful to Mrs. Scott too for asking questions to you about from the perspective of school teachers, because me being a school teacher myself. Now, my question is that after Achedin came to visit us, we are being taught many things and preached through social media in connection to that question. Now, one thing I recognize that it came to us through messages, firstly WhatsApp, then trolling, then social media, that don't believe in the history taught by Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib and Sumit Sarkar, and you believe in the actual history of India through Mahabharata, Ramayana and all. And I'm very surprised that it came initially in English, then it came to Hindi, and nowadays it's coming in by Bangla too. I mean, this has become so huge in all sections of people, I think. How do you react to these kind of messages, and what do you, what should you be telling us people that maybe now I am having this discussion this wonderful day, and now I know that what are the reasons behind it. Many people are there, but these are all 50 or 100 people. There are so many people, these people are reaching out and telling them. There are people even who don't know anything about, but they know that only these are the people whose history shouldn't be read, shouldn't be studied, shouldn't be doing at all. So what is the message, and what do you think about these things?
Well, I think that one of the things that a democracy is supposed to hold is the right to question. And I think that one of the problems in our society has been that there aren't enough people that question the social media. That there are people who happily sit there, read it, believe a fair amount of it, and then just carry on doing what they're doing. There are not enough people saying, is this really so? And if a message comes saying, do not read the histories of X, Y, and Z, the reaction should be, please tell us why not. You know, what is it about these histories? Let's have a little discussion on the two kinds of histories. But instead of that, most people just say, oh, it says don't read the histories of X, Y, and Z, and so all right, we won't read the histories of X, Y, and Z. So that questioning attitude, which is so essential to any kind of democratic society. And this is where I think it's a vicious circle, because if you don't teach students in school to ask questions, they will not ask questions. They will not ask questions when they go to college. They will not ask questions when they're citizens. And this is obviously something that pleases all political parties, that you produce a student body that does not ask questions. And I think it's absolutely fundamental that at a very simple level, that one should go on propagating this idea that whatever you're told, you don't necessarily have to believe it. Ask the question why and discuss it. And then if you believe it, fine. But that basic questioning attitude has to be there. And no political party is going to defend that, because they know perfectly well that the next question will be, why aren't you doing what you claim to be doing?
Thank you.
I don't think it's...
Yeah, sorry. I have a question regarding the framing of a history curriculum. If a school, and I think many schools have the luxury to frame their own curriculum up to class 8. So if the school or the teacher has the luxury and the freedom to frame a curriculum without any constraints, I have two questions regarding this. First, what do you say about the perceived precedence that modern history takes over ancient history? And second of all, do you think it's better to frame a curriculum centered around concepts and themes such as, say, war and revolution, or is it better to teach history chronologically?
First of all, the precedence of modern history will always remain because of the job situation. You can get much more in the way of a range of jobs available to you if you do modern history. I mean, who's interested in ancient history, for heaven's sakes? I remember the time when I was saying I want to study ancient history, and people would say, what's the matter with you? And it's a bit like that, you know, that's so far away. The point is that that connection between the past and the present, and the degree to which we determine the past, and the degree to which the past determines us today, that connection is missing here. The past is something out there, doesn't come in. So the modern history is the immediate past, and that has some little relevance. You can go into the administrative service, and you can do all kinds of things, though that's beginning to change. I get lots and lots of emails from prospective candidates for the IAS exam saying, what are the likely questions? And I have to write back and say, I haven't the faintest idea what the likely questions are, but still, anyway. So it will always be that little difference, that the modern history is regarded as more relevant, because the relevance is related to jobs, quite rightly. It's not related to how do you think, which I think is probably more to the point if you do pre-modern history, because it forces you, if you do it properly, it forces you. Your second question on concepts, you know, I don't separate concepts from events, in the sense that when you're dealing with events, you should, at some point, be talking about the why and the how. And that is where the concepts come in. And that is where, on individual issues, on individual chronologies, individual major events, changes, historical change, one should weave in the explanation for why it happened, and that then brings in the concepts and the whole discussion.
So it should be chronological instead of
It should be chronological, because one, after all, sees it from the past to the present. and it makes greater sense if it is chronological. But in the process of making it chronological, you don't drop the concepts. You
But then, how do you pick and choose in the chronology? Because you cannot do everything.
No, so you choose a very broad chronology. I mean, you don't have to go through the reigns of every king in a dynasty. But if over 2 centuries there are broad changes, you discuss those changes. I mean, ultimately, really, this is such a futile exercise to go on with dynasties and kings and battles and so on, unless you explain that, you know, you have a bunch of kings in a particular dynasty, and those that are patrons of Shaivism are fighting against their sons or brothers or fathers who were patrons of Jainism. Why was there this fight? Then it makes sense that you bring in these names. Otherwise, you just go on listing names. It's, as various friends of mine say, history books are like telephone directories. You have the dates on one side and you have the events beside them. But you have to integrate the concepts into the events in order to make sense of both.
Hi, Professor Thakur. It's a question, but it's also a request for a tip. In taking on, how Hindu right-wingers, especially those who claim to be historians, it's usually an easy task. But I was stumped on this one question. So this person, speaks to me, and we go back to, of course, Mahmud of Ghazna, one of the favorite villains for that side. And he speaks to me about the kind of history that you yourself have written and my professors in medieval history at JNU had taught us. Namely that to take the focus away from the religious explanation for Mahmud's various raids and to focus much more on the material dimensions. So people speak of how this was economically useful for him, especially the sacking of temples, and also that there was a political motivation as was a military motivation. So take the focus away from religion and place it on more material dimensions. So this person then says, well, then what is so wrong with the destruction of the Babri Mosque? After all, it's politically motivated. So, do you see my problem? I mean, one level of explanation.
The answer to that, well, the one obvious easy answer is this is 1,000 years later. Surely we have learned that these are not the ways in which problems are solved. You don't solve problems by going around destroying monuments. And the only reason why you do it is that you're building up a corpus of voters for the next election, which is precisely what happened with the destruction of the Babri Masjid.
Right. But 100 years from now, would people not look back at the Babri Masjid and say, well, this is, a party that wants to build a religiously based majority. Its motivations were not religious, its motivations were political.
Well, I don't think that it'll be that clear. I don't think it'll be that definitive 100 years from now, because let's not forget that the present dispensation may go on for quite some time. And by that I don't mean the government, I mean the kind of stuff that the middle class is being fed on. It will feed the next generation, and the next generation will feed the next generation. So I see the 21st century as a write-off, frankly. But anyway, the point is that hopefully 100 years from now they will see the other dimensions as well, and not treat it as a purely religious thing, which is the way in which it's being treated now. But I think at this point too, one has to keep on emphasizing the fact that it's not a purely religious thing.
Thank you.
I think after this, we're going to have to go down because people downstairs are sending angry messages. What have we done wrong? So we'll take 2 questions from downstairs after, and then if there's time, come back. Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, I have 2 questions. First is, what is the relationship? What is the relationship between authenticity and history? And
Sorry, what is the relationship?
authentic, and history. And my second question, I will sum up in few words. And do you think it becomes difficult for the historians to gather sources from the ancient texts, such as if I go to Mahabharata and Ramayana, it is a story, it is just an epic. So sometimes it becomes difficult to what is the background, what is the ideology behind creating such stories. And even if I talk about the Upanishads and the Vedas, there are no such authentic texts like they only discussed about the magics, about the different rituals, but they are not saying what happened in those times. Like it is just we are getting some ideologies from there and framing the history. So how authentic it is and how should we advance in this field?
You know, one of the problems is that the ancient texts have always been treated as not telling us about history. We haven't gone to the ancient texts and said, now let's find out what they're telling us about the reality, the history. So, written into the approach is that we're not really looking for history, we're just looking for whatever they tell us. And so what are they telling us? Their texts on ritual, their texts on religion, their texts on philosophy. So we look only for that and we take that. But the point is that the historian has to look beyond, in a sense. It is, and I'm not saying this in any very traditional way, but I think it's very tough to be a historian, possibly tougher than to be a philosopher, because you're constantly having to say, now this is what is being said, what is its real meaning? How do we go beyond what is being said? Let me give you an example, which is often quoted, that in one of the Upanishads there is the story of this young man called Jabala Satyakama, and he comes to the Rishi and says, I want to become your student. And the Rishi turns round and talks to him and then says, are you a Brahman? And Jabala says, I really don't know what caste I am, because my mother is a Dasi and she works in a household. And in the household she's expected to do everything, and there are men who come and go, they're guests and friends and so on, and I have to attend to them as well, so I don't know who your father is, and I can't give you a caste. Now this story has been repeated again and again in various books on history about how it was such an open society and then everybody came in and so on. What are the important issues to the social historian? That he's asked, are you a Brahmin? Does this mean that learning and knowledge by instinct were only meant for Brahmins? That's a very major question that needs to be asked, and then you go on to reading the other Upanishads to see whether they in some way give some enlightenment on this question. The second important issue is that he says, my mother was a Dasi, and so she doesn't know who my father is. So what was the role of the Dasi who's employed in a household? She's not just cooking and cleaning and serving in the house. She's required, in fact, to be available to the men who come. Now this is another dimension, again, that is brought in, which people don't comment on sufficiently. That what was the role of the Dasis in these households? They were not just ordinary servants. And then, of course, there is the classic response when he tells this to the Rishi. The Rishi says, oh, so you've told me the truth, you must be a Brahmin. Now that again is a very interesting comment, historically. And so there's this story, and there are many stories like this, but this one in particular, which is, all these history books that you read on the Vedic period will mention this in adulatory terms. How many social historians will raise these issues? Today, yes, the social historians of today are making these comments. They are going to these stories and episodes and saying, we have these questions to ask as well. So it's that the problem with the historian is you just have to say what's behind it.
That is the problem.
That is the problem, yeah. As I was told when I was an undergraduate and I did one essay on something or the other, and it wasn't Basham, it was someone else who was teaching us philosophy, and he read the essay and he turned around to me and he said, you know, you think that's very good, but you're not suspicious enough. And I've never forgotten that advice, that you're not suspicious enough. As a scholar, and this is the big distinction, I'm not saying that one shouldn't be respectful of these texts. Yes, they're great texts, they are texts that one is proud of, one respects them. But as a historian and a scholar, and as an analytical scholar, you have to be suspicious.
No, it always depends on the perspectives.
It does, which is why it's very important to read a lot on theories of explanation and get a perspective.
Subhadra, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Very clearly.
Okay, thank you.
Coming from downstairs.
Ghost voice, sorry.
Yes.
Good afternoon, teacher. Thanks for your participation here. I'm a bit unlucky that I can see your virtual view, but thanks to the technology. Now I have a quick question. One is about the recently NASA satellite which says about the Ram Setu. So what are the evidence, I mean archaeological or historical evidence do we have to support it? Number two is about the swastika. It belongs to, we know that it's a Hinduism, but is it related to the 1868 German excavation about the Turkey on the Troy and how it is connected to the Nazism? Thank you.
Can you just repeat that quickly, please?
The second question.
Yeah.
The second question is about the swastika symbol. We know it is belongs to the Hinduism, but my question is it related to the 1868 German archaeologist excavation at Turkey for the Troy and how it is connected to the Nazism? Swastika symbol.
The archaeological excavation of where?
Troy.
I'm sorry, I know nothing about this archaeological excavation in Turkey. What looks like the swastika, remember of course that some people use the swastika in one way, where the arms turned left, and there were others who used it in the opposite way, where the arms turned right. In Tibet, for example, the Bonpo religion does use the swastika, but it uses it in the opposite way. And then you have, much later, the use of the same symbol in Buddhist monuments used in the other way. So you have to be clear as to which way the swastika is being used. Now, the symbol itself is a very ancient symbol. It does occur in excavations in Central Asia, in northeastern Iran and areas like that. So it goes back a long way. We don't know what the meaning was. There are lots of people who've tried to give it a meaning. But there is no single meaning which everybody accepts. I'm sorry, I don't know about this Turkish excavation, so I can't answer that question.
But what about the first question? That's interesting. Is there any proper historical, archaeological evidence for the Ram Setu? Because that is the most recent claim that has come up, that it was man-built.
There are two things. One is, when was the name Ram Setu first given to this supposed bridge? It's quite late. The identification is quite late. Remember, of course, that until about 30 or 40 years ago, scholars that worked on the Ramayana all said that Lanka was somewhere in the Vindhyan region. It stretched from the west across the Vindhyas to the Mahanadi Delta. There were various locations that were then marked out as Lanka. In, I think it is the Mundari language, that Lanka is used frequently as a geographical location. And it means a long distance away. Anyway, and so this identification of the geological formation that connects Rameshwaram with Sri Lanka is a relatively modern idea that has come into existence. Now, you cannot say, you cannot give an answer one way or the other until the actual geological formation is properly analyzed to see whether it is a natural formation or whether it is a historical formation. It's true that at the time when sea levels may have been much lower, that the rocks stood out and that it was possible to go across from rock to rock quite easily and get from one area to the other. As the sea level rose, then presumably it became necessary to build constructions linking these rocks. Even if there are constructions, human constructions linking these rocks, we have to analyze what kind of constructions these are and what is the period. You cannot say that any human construction goes back to the period of the Ramayana. First of all, we don't know what the period of the Ramayana is to start with, but assuming that it is somewhere along the early first millennium BC, even that period, we have to be certain that the human construction is of that period. So the archaeological work that will have to be done, if there is a human construction, will have to be done very precisely and very carefully. And I think that my fear is that, first of all, that this will be another case of the philosophy of unconcern. And this debate will carry on, because it suits everybody that this debate should carry on, and there's always this business of this was the Ram Setu, therefore the Ramayana was absolutely correct and it can be located in this location. There's that lobby. There's the other lobby which says let's do a geological survey. Now how precisely and carefully that survey will be done is another story. And thirdly, there is the historical archaeological approach, that if there is something over there, it will mean today underwater archaeology, which is its own kind of discipline, and will it be done as thoroughly and efficiently as it requires. One of the problems in all these issues and all these questions where religious texts are brought in and the authenticity of religious texts is under question, is that the historical archaeological work that has to be done has to be doubly careful, which it is not. There is a tendency for archaeologists, historians and others to say, oh yes, there's a bit of human construction here, therefore there was a Ram Setu. Now that's not the answer at all. That only aggravates the problem. Wherever there are these problems of inauthenticity, where there are these problems of there being, as it were, crowded reasoning, it is necessary that the investigation be all that much more meticulous.
I'm afraid we've maybe one more from downstairs, and that's the last question. Is that okay? We'll have to make this the last one then. Sorry.
Yes, due respect to my guru, philosophical guru of historical research, Professor Ramila Thapar. I'm straight come down from Dhaka to here. I'm a life member of the Asiatic Society of Bangladesh and chief of the Dhaka History Research Center. And I'm working on 2000 years of Dhaka city. My question is, I'm very much confused about some terms. Whether I can treat Hindu as a religion or Hindu as a geographical nation. Because the term Hindu is, to me, is neither Indian nor subcontinental. The term comes from the Indus Greek term, the Greek language, Indus. So I'm very confused regarding this was whether I can define Hindu as a religion or Hindu as a geographical relation. If a geographical relation, in that case, to me, neither India nor Bangladesh is Hindustan. Stan comes from the Turkmenistan, Azerbaijan, and Central Asian. The Stan, S-T-A-N, the land. So in that case, if we go through the history, in that case, Indus Valley civilization means Indus Valley civilization, not the religion. The geographical inhabitants, original inhabitants, those incorrectly, I can say Pakistan as Hindustan, neither India nor Bangladesh. Yes, I'm very much confused regarding this. Number two is, as present India, or the British India, or the early India, it consists of hundreds of languages, hundreds of religions, hundreds of cultures, and hundreds of society. In that case, we have seen the pre-Mughal period, Sultanate period, and the Mughal period, how they administered this Jovan unification, and previously these were individual states, district states or provincial states, small states, not United India. How they administered. And in the future, whether it is possible to administer the whole United India on the basis of a religion is not possible or not. Thank you.
Gosh, that's a very involved, long question. Let me begin by saying that the problem about defining India, and I'm using it in a general sense, is that we tend to see it in terms of the British Indian territory. When we talk about these were foreigners, these were aliens, we're looking at the borders that were drawn up by the British Indian administration. People on the other side of the border were foreign and we were indigenous, that kind of thing. And I think it has also something to do, this is my favorite argument, that borders really become borders once cartography comes into existence. Then you have a map and you draw a line and it becomes a border. I have great problems, and particularly these days, because there are many historians who draw the map of the Mauryan Empire. All the inscriptions, they, like joining the dots, they draw a line linking up all the inscriptions. And I'm saying that in those periods, you didn't have boundaries that were linear. You had frontier zones. My kingdom comes up to this river or this mountain and yours starts the other side. So that area of the mountain and the river valley tends to be kind of vague, and it can be a bit of you and it can be a bit of me. And I think that if we had that, many problems would be solved today. Our problems today are these lines that we carefully draw and say, you've crossed this line or you haven't crossed this line or whatever it may be. But this is a historical problem and I won't go into this very much. The name. It begins, of course, the earliest evidence that we have is Sindhu, which is the Indus River, which is rendered as Hindush in the Persian inscriptions, because the H and the S are interchangeable. And in the same way as they say Ahura, we say Asura, and so on. So the Sindhu becomes the Hindu. And the early Achaemenid inscriptions talk about the satrapi of the Persian Empire being Gandhara and Sindh and being along the Hindu. The Greeks come along and they change the word into Indus, right? So we've already got, it's the Indus which is regarded as the identity giver, the marker, and it's used in this sense. Now in the Indian texts, the words that are generally, the terms that are generally used are either Aryavart, and that changes in the sense the Brahmanical texts treat Aryavart as being very much the middle area, the Doab and the Ganges, the Punjab and that area. The Buddhist texts shifted a little eastwards because Buddhism is much more Magadh and the middle Ganges valley. The Jain texts shifted a little more eastwards. Small shifts, but still. And Manu then comes along and says Aryavart is everything from the Himalayas down to the land between the two seas, which was the Vindhyas. So the term Aryavart cannot be used right the way through because it shifts its meaning. Or you have Jambudvipa. Ashoka talks about in his inscriptions, Iha Jambudvipa. Now this Jambudvipa, but he doesn't tell us what is Jambudvipa. We don't know. It's vaguely this area, but we don't. Similarly with Bharatvarsh, it's mentioned, but we don't know exactly what the definition is. It's not defined. And then that carries on. Alright, then we come to the Arabs and the Turks, and they refer to the area as Al-Hind. Hind being from the Persian, Hindush, Hind, again referring to the Indus. So Al-Hind is seen from the Arab and Persian point of view. Al-Hind is the land on the other side, the east of the Indus. And originally it is used as Al-Hind, where live the Hindus and the Hindis, the people of Al-Hind. They make no reference to religion, it's always the people. And then by about the 15th century, the 14th, 15th century, you begin to get the difference between the Hindu as a religious category and the Hindu as a people, people of the nation. But you still get, you don't have Hindu and Muslim, but you have Hindu and Turushk. For example, Eknath writing his famous Hindu-Turk Samvad in the 16th century. He's not saying Hindu-Muslim Samvad, he's saying Hindu-Turk, and he's referring to the Muslims, the Turushkas as they were called sometimes. So one has to go into the question of when in history does a term become common usage. And certainly Hindu and Muslim in the religious sense become common usage only by about the 15th, 16th century. So it's quite late. And then when the British come and they conquer and carve out their empire and they draw their line and make this into British India, they call it India after the Greek, Indus. So that's the story of that. Now, this is, it's a very difficult thing. I mean, I have faced this question in this book on Talking History, where somebody asked me, how can you talk about ancient Indian history? Because there was no India then. It's like the question that was raised with ancient Pakistan. Everybody said, how can you talk about ancient Pakistan? But the point is that one is not talking. When I write a book called Early India, I'm talking about the subcontinent. And I make this very clear, that I am not talking about India as it is defined today. Because who knows, in another 100 years it may be defined differently. So one's talking about a subcontinental entity, which is more geographical than historical. And I think the end result is going to be, I mean, the way in which nations are being created all over, we may have to revert back to using the geographical entity as our regional entity.
I think
the question, the second question was on whether it's possible on the secular basis a state can be run or administered, or on the religious basis, whether it is possible or not in future.
No, I think in the future it has to be secular.
And on that note, I think we unfortunately really have to end here. It's been the most wonderful Sunday morning, and I'm sure everybody agrees with me. The last question I have the right to. When can we bring you back? Thank you, Professor Baba. Thank you, Mrs. Scott. Thank you all of you for being here.